Welcome to Tour G on water management. My name is Brian Leib. I'm a professor and extension irrigation specialist in the Biosystems Engineering and Soil Science Department at the University of Tennessee. What I'd like to spend some time talking to you about today is applying irrigation recommendations on farm. To get the idea of where I'd like to head, here are some goals. I'd like us to better understand the challenge of irrigation management in Tennessee because of our variable soils and variable rainfall. Also, I'd like us to see how our work with small plots and on-farm demonstrations with producers has been incorporated into Tennessee-based recommendations, and then take a look at those tools that are available for Tennessee irrigators. To get that started, I guess I'd like to take us to a location we wanted to work with a producer on north of Brownsville to do some better job irrigating. And this is, I think, very typical of our hill ground in West Tennessee. You can see here on your left, a drainage ditch, and then the bottom ground right next to it that's flat and generally wetter. And then you proceed up the hills to some hilltops. And I think that's pretty common. So in doing that work, a lot of times will gather some information on soils and yield maps. And here we put together some yield maps of over 3 years, 2010 to 2012. And it showed something we were really looking for. It shows that under the pivot on the hill ground, there's quite a bit of yield increase compared to the corner. So irrigation is doing some good here, while at the same time, if you look below in the bottom ground, irrigation doesn't appear to have done much good or bad. It looks about the same inside and outside the pivot. So that's something we were looking at, but I expected some differences than that as we proceeded in this location. But what I didn't really expect was something this drastic. So here in 2014, a wet year, you can see some drastic differences between the hill and the bottom ground. Most noticeably is the bottom ground. There's a lowering of yield, but also no yield. That's how wet the conditions were here. It was so wet that it delayed planting. So even on some of this hill ground where it was delayed planting, with the bottom ground, the yields are lower because it's later planting, different variety. But then again, just this total loss of yield in some sections of the field. As compared to the hill ground, you can see that the yield inside and outside the pivot are about the same. And again, we did swipe this with the pivot, two small applications, but it really didn't look like it didn't made much difference. So again, that's just trying to define what are some of the challenges we're looking at in Tennessee. We're looking at having to make decisions that can help yield, or maybe irrigation decisions that could hurt yield. We gotta be able to make that distinction to do a good job. Here's another typical situation we encounter in West Tennessee, but quite different. If you get along the Mississippi River on the Mississippi Delta, the Mississippi River on this field is actually right here. You can see in these yield maps some drastic differences of yield caused by really differences in soil texture. Here is the silts and clay ground, and here's the sand ground. And so in 2012, there's drastic difference in yield in this cotton caused by that. And then if we jump to 2013, you can see that all disappears. Now, I would really like to claim that we did this solely with irrigation, but it was a good rainfall year plus irrigation. So I think our irrigation did help to create this, because you can look outside the pivot in the sandy areas with a lot lower yields. But really, I have to give a lot of credit to a better rainfall year in 2013. But as you look at 2014, you can see something in between. You can see as we tried to pie-shaped zone this and irrigate this earlier with more water, we had sensors here, and then outside we had sensor system. I think we did a better job than we had in the past, that we improved the yield in here, especially because we weren't doing that over here in the sandy areas. You can see the difference that it made. So again, here's another situation where if you get on these better soils early with this amount of water that you did for the sand, you're going to hurt yield. But if you do that here, you improve yield. So again, how can we divide this up and do a better job with irrigation management? So with a little bit of that in mind, some of our challenges, and again, this picture gives us a challenge. Here we are irrigating, and in the background are rain clouds. We are always in that situation. There's probably many years there's a rain forecast in the future. We don't know maybe when it's going to rain quite or how much, but we got to decide if we're going to irrigate or not. And so approach that I have come to define as managed depletion irrigation, what I really want to do is, in comparison to full irrigation, where we always put water on as soon as it's used out of the soil profile, is to wait, to let a significant depletion occur before we decide to irrigate. And what I think that really helps us do is better capture rainfall for when it does rain. We have some space to store that water. prevents us from keeping the soil profile so full that when we get a big and unexpected rain, we're also all of a sudden excessively wet, poor drainage called yield loss through waterlogging. But we don't go so far with that depletion that we lose yield to drought stress. So we won't want to go that far either. We still want as best a yield as possible. At the same time, we have less water on the canopy. That can be helpful, and we don't promote necessarily vegetative growth when we really want to promote reproductive growth. So again, that's kind of our approach. In addition to working on farms simultaneously, we're working on the research stations where we can do a lot more treatments and a lot more monitoring. And so I just want to give you one of the experiments we worked on at the in a deep silt loam soil in soybeans at the Jackson station. And you can see we have 10 irrigation treatments. We start in the irrigation or initiate it at R1, R3, and R5. And when we just finally start irrigating these plots, we do it at 3 different rates: 0.5 inches per week, 1 inch per week, and 1.5 inches per week. And again, I think you can see how this will create different amounts of depletion at different times. It is really possible that starting at R1 with 1.5 inch is full irrigation or very close to it, but everything else is not. When we decide to put less water on, that could create a deficit. And then also when we wait, we're creating deficits. So we're testing all these different ways of letting the soil moisture dry out before starting to irrigate. Now, I don't want you to think that we just put this much water on no matter what. After we started it, we did adjust for rainfall and make adjustments according to how much it rained that week. And again, I think it's always important to compare it to no irrigation at all, or a rain-fed treatment. So just as a really quick summary of what happened over from 2013 to 17, 4 of those years were really very similar. We had pretty good rainfall during the season, 23 inches. We only needed around 2 inches of irrigation on average to optimize yield with a minimum amount of water, and that irrigation only had to occur in R5. And just a little bit of look, we got about a 10 bushel yield bump from our best irrigated with the least water to the rain-fed. And that's about a 10 to 15% increase on a very wet growing season. There was only 1 year, 2017, where the dry period hit earlier. We had to start earlier to get our optimum yield, and at R3, and we had to put on more like 5 inches of water. Got about the same yield bump. Again, when you look at our total yields we were looking at, it's actually more like a 25% increase over the rain-fed yield. So again, just showing you that how important it can be to get it right, get the water in the right time period. At the same time we're doing these experiments, we're putting the same equipment that we put in producers' fields in these experiments that we're doing on research farms. We're using meter group sensors. It's now called a ZL6 and Zentra Cloud, but so this has changed. I should update this, but anyway, we're putting a logger like this in with cell communication so we can have real-time information wherever we're at. We put in a rain gauge. And we compare that rain gauge then to temperature and humidity and soil aeration, because we can take these 2 items and estimate crop water use. So we can compare how much water is going into soil to how much is coming out. And then at the same time, we're monitoring the soil status. So if we take a look at some of those results, here's those matrix potential sensors in the 2016 year of that soybean trial I showed you earlier. And if you take a look at this one, when we start at R1 with 1.5 inches, yeah, it is looking kind of like full irrigation between R1 to R6 when we stop irrigating, because the soil moisture never really drops and stays fairly close to field capacity. And that was a very good yield. And then if we did wait to R3 and a lesser rate, 1 inch per we can see, oh, well, by not even turning on, we've created a deficit, but we did get back up into more recommended range by other research in the Southeast that says we've got to stay above 100 or 70. So at least at one of the sensors, we got back up in that range, and we had an equal yield in this to this, but with less water. And then the same thing happened when we waited to R5. You can see a huge deficit below where we usually think we need to irrigate with matrix potential sensors, which is more up in here. And again, we had some rainfall right before we switched to this growth stage plus irrigation, helped us keep 1 sensor in the recommended range. And again, this yield equals that, but with only 2 inches of water, maybe compared to 6. So that would be our optimum treatment. But the only place we showed lower yield really was in the rain-fed or dryland. And I did show this R5 to R6 period, and I just hit the button. Um, and so really, we kind of already feel like we know this is okay because it was okay here. It's this period in R5 to R6 where we fall below those recommendations we see published quite frequently that we lost some yield. Not a lot, but we did. A noticeable 10 to 15% of the yield happened right here in R5. So again, so we have that to plus not just this year, but many years, different soils, different crops to pull for, to make recommendations. But again, at the same time, we're looking at the water balance also, not just the sensors. So this is a little busy for you to get to look at, but what you see is, let's go down to the rain-fed dryland one. This red line would be the water out of the soil. This is crop water use, and it gets up mid-season up to around 1.5 inches per week or maybe a little more. And what these blue dots are rainfall. So what happens in the soil when crop water use exceeds rainfall? As we do see in these 4 weeks in a row, we see a drop in soil moisture. And what happens when we have more rainfall than crop water use? The soil moisture would go back up. And so what this final line denotes is this is for soybeans in a good water holding silt loam soil. We feel like we can pull out 3 inches or a little more of water without hurting yield. So it's when we cross this line, we think we have yield reduction. And actually we see that happening when we lost yield at R5. Now, they don't all come out this clean, but we have all these years to look at this and kind of compare. Now, as you go back to the irrigated treatments, you can see the R1 at 1.5 inches of irrigation pretty much did keep full irrigation, zero depletion until we stopped irrigating out here past R6. And again, we had good yield there. You see when we started at R3 with 1 inch, we pull the soil moisture way down, but we really don't cross this line ever. So we had good yield here, same as here. And then again, when we get to R5, 1 inch, we pull it even down further. In fact, even in R5, we crossed a little bit, but we couldn't really notice a yield loss from that. So again, this would seem to be a pretty good estimate to stay within, at least in this year. But we have other years to look at and help us decide how to make recommendations based on water balance. So over 15 years, 20 some site years of research farm experiments, plus over 100 some site years of work on farm with producers, we've come up so far with, well, we have more than this, but these are two that I primarily worked on. We have the basis of cotton irrigation and the basis of soybean irrigation for Tennessee. And so we've taken those recommendations. We've done as best we could to put them into a one-pager, quick facts. But also, if you want to go deeper, we have 5 more pages that redescribes this in more detail. So you'll get a quantitative look on where we got response to irrigation, what growth stages, what conditions we need to irrigate under. But also, if you want to go qualitative, we'll help you look at how to use soil moisture sensors, mostly matrix potential sensors, and a water balance to accomplish good yields in all years through irrigation in Tennessee. We've gone a little further than that. We've made a real-time tools. We're calling the latest version of the Moisture app. And it's a long an acronym, but what it really stands for is Management of Irrigation Systems with Soil Tension in Tennessee and Up-to-Date Rainfall and Evapotranspiration. That's kind of long, but it does summarize what we're doing in this approach. And I want to show you the main part of this approach, how we kind of look at that soil tension to help us make decisions. First of all, I think what is different than other approaches is we really do emphasize that you can be too wet. And that's this range. And you can be dry where you start to lose yield. So here, back in 2021, and this is a common case through May into early June, we're really on the wet side of the spectrum in West Tennessee and maybe most of Tennessee, because we have all that winter rainfall and our crops aren't that big to use that much water. So we're often pinned up against this into early June. And if you're pinned over here, that means you could have very little oxygen in the soil, and it's a bad situation to be in for cotton, corn, and soybeans. But if you do move over here eventually, it more means there's oxygen in the soil, but if the soil can drain, it will drain away. So why would you ever want to irrigate here when that water can be wasted? And then this area is where we want to be. We have easily available water for the crop, and then here we're too dry. And I'll just show you what happened in this particular field in August, the driest period in 2021. We did cross over, but we just barely crossed over until the crop really didn't need to be irrigated anymore. It was pretty much finished. And so, yeah, there could be a little, I wouldn't expect from just being here for a short period, just crossing this line, there's a lot of yield loss, But if you camped over here for a long time, that could be the case. So now what I'd like to do is just show you something that's real time, at least real time to when I recorded this. I'll do some real time at the actual Milan no-till field day that'll be up to date. But for now, I have to do this because I don't know the future. So if we're looking at the time period around at the beginning of June and some corn that was planted in Fayette County. And so if we look at the date I actually did this, it was 6/7. And I looked back 3 days to see some changes. So we did have some drying. There's no rainfall showed here. There'd only been about 1.46 inches of rain since we planted, which was pretty early. It was the April 30th. And then, yeah, we started to see a little drying, not a lot. We just pulled these off of here. And we have some water that could drain, but there's probably inhibited drainage here, so we're probably not losing that much water. We have oxygen in the soil, and we actually got a cross field capacity on the top sensor at 6 inches. But then over this next 3-day period, we had not very much rain, just about a third. Actually, we have a routine to decide between rain and irrigation. Actually, it threw a wrong value here. This should be in the rainfall category, but with just a third of an inch of water applied, all we did was bump this sensor back up here. So we still are nowhere close to needing to irrigate. Although as I sit here now and see the future forecast with corn really growing, maybe within the next week, if it's or more, it stays dry, it'll be time to irrigate as corn heads into sensitive growth stages. So that's one field on corn. We have another one's up in Weakley County, and it was planted a little bit earlier. It got drainage under it, so it could get planted early. It got planted, I believe, April 24th, so it's a little further along. And again, the same 2 days, the 4th, the 7th. Again, we saw some drain, hadn't been some rain for a while, planted earlier. I think the sensor station was in earlier. We had more rain during that period up to this point, but none just recently. So we see drying in the top sensor. Well, because of that water table still be fairly high, it's really wet down below. Again, this doesn't really, to me, indicate the need to irrigate because the roots are below that, able to access this wetter part of the root zone. But then we have more like an inch of rain in the next 3 days, and you see everything's pinned back up, and the drainage system is still left wide open to try to keep water out of the soil and let those corn roots grow. So again, no need to irrigate, but again, the future could change that really quickly. So that's really all I have for you. You'll have a chance to ask some questions. Here's my contact information. I look forward to seeing you at the Milan No-Till Field Day.